Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Human Podcast. On today's episode, I get to talk to Dr. Shana Weber. Dr. Shana Weber is founding director of Princeton University's Office of Sustainability and also a colleague and a friend here in Princeton, New Jersey. On today's episode, we talk about sustainability, what it is exactly. We also talk about Princeton University projects as they pertain to climate change and sustainability and behavioral science. And we also get into environmental justice and other important topics. So please stay tuned and enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Human Podcast. Today, we have a friend and colleague, Dr. Shana Weber, who is the founding director of Princeton University's Office of Sustainability. She came to Princeton University in 2006. And her work, among other things, many other things, includes climate change-driven population dynamics and also the application of behavioral science to sustainability decision-making. So welcome, Shana, my friend, to this podcast and for sharing all of your knowledge.
Thank you, Ailey. It's great to be here.
Really just start off by telling me and the audience, I should say, I hope not me only, because I don't want to say what I don't know, but give us all a general description or definition of what sustainability is, because people hear that all the time, but they may not actually understand what it fully means.
Yeah, that's very true. And it used to be that sustainability was sort of thought of as a kind of an outgrowth of the recycling sort of dilemma of years past. Well, it's continuing, but it's much, much more than that. So sustainability is really, it's really about how do we foster a healthier connection with the natural world and the support systems that the planet offers, right? So we all want clean air, clean water. We all want our kids to grow up in healthy environments. It's urban, it's rural, it's everywhere. It intersects with environmental justice issues around the world. So it intersects with like the daily decisions we make and the institutional decisions that are made. It's a very holistic way of thinking about problem solving in the interest of human beings living healthy lives on this planet, in partnership with nature.
It's a global ecosystem.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about how you got into this area of study. I know you grew up in Indiana, which is not New Jersey.
Nope.
So tell me a little bit about how that led to where you are now.
I grew up in a fairly large family. So it was a very dynamic home. And my parents were always very interested in exposing us to lots of different things. And one thing we did a lot of was camping. And so, we had a little lake that we used to visit in Michigan, which is where my parents are from. And, so sort of growing up, chasing tadpoles and, fishing and running around in the woods and, that kind of freedom to play in nature and to discover things was really central to sort of who I became. And I loved the mystery of nature. You never knew what you were going to find, as a kid. It's like, am I going to find a toad today? Or am I going to, what's it going to be? What little glimpse am I going to get into the secret life of some critter, out there? And that, for me, that was like really magical. And so from that love of nature and the love of the sort of how it made me feel to discover things in nature, I think really fed my scientific curiosity, but also my curiosity about how as human beings in the modern world, we've kind of lost our connection in a lot of ways. We've lost our connection with how our food is produced. We've lost that like daily connection with the earth. So, I mean, gardeners, right? They get it, right? You got in your garden, you've got your hands in the dirt. That's a very important connection, right? You can do that with a window box garden or a big garden out in the yard. It doesn't matter the scale. There's something about that like connection with growing things that feeds us as human beings, right? So that's kind of like my core motivation for what I do. So um that all translates to working at an institution where there are, people doing research in lots of different areas. There's students who are soaking it all up. There's staff who are kind of curating the environment that everybody's in on the campus. There's relationships with the community surrounding the campus. There's relationships across, national and international networks. So it's, um, and I'm discovering that many in this field have similar sort of core experiences and core motivations of like this love for nature and love for that connection to be made, in different ways.
It feels natural though, like even in medicine, or at least integrative medicine, I wouldn't say necessarily conventional medicine, there's such a push towards immersing in nature, green, mental health.
Yes.
And you couldn't connect the two more clearly than even right now with what's going on environmentally, and then what's going on with COVID and being indoors and looking at four walls, as opposed to sort of walking out and breathing clean air if you can be in that environment, or seeing green or going walking. And so I just think it's really interesting that, that was your core, that was your roots.
Yeah.
And yet now some people are trying to find those kind of roots because they didn't necessarily grow up in that environment. And so you went on to get your degree in zoology.
I did. So when I was an undergrad, I was mostly interested in ecology kind of stuff. But what was offered at Ohio State University, where I was at the time, was zoology. So I'm like, all right, I'll do that. That's where all the ecology courses were. So so then and I went on after that to get a couple of graduate degrees in different areas, mostly environmental science, both master's and PhD, but really focusing on ecological systems and climate change. But I also became really fascinated by the political process, not partisanship, but like, how does the political process work? How do environmental issues work their way through the political system? So I spent a year kind of working as a Senate intern out in California, trying to understand the language of that translation from science to policy, right? And I actually got to work with Tom Hayden, which was really an eye-opening, wonderful experience.
Tell us who Tom Hayden is.
Well, he was. Gosh, part of the environmental movement of the 60s, very much a social activist, was married to Jane Fonda for a while. And so he was very much involved in developing policy around environmental issues. So I got to see kind of a glimpse of that process and how that works.
And you'd say that, I mean, basically with all the good of research and everyone's silos of research, that if it doesn't translate, and I know this is a lot of what you like to work on, is behavioral change, and not just the individual, but how does the system get things to change? I mean, it's such a big, overwhelming, and sometimes daunting process, right?
It is. But it's kind of, a campus is a perfect place. Campuses and towns are like a really great scale to work on these issues, because you can stay at the personal. And I think that's really critical, because you can scale up, but if you don't have the personal scale involved, it doesn't, I think the potential for broad scale change is minimized if you don't have people's hearts in it, and it's not active at the personal scale. So on the campus, it's a perfect living laboratory, living classroom to try to work on change at all scales, starting with the personal and then working on the institutional. And then, of course, because we're a campus, we have networks all over the world and potential to scale things or to push innovation, right? So if we do something on the campus that looks really promising from a research standpoint, then maybe there's an industry partner that we can, work with to bring that to market that helps everybody. So that sort of innovation ecosystem kind of approach is really exciting, where we
That's
can link, the research and the practice and industry and supply chains and all of that.
So that being said, tell me a little bit about your most. I would say the projects that brought you the most pride, things that really did fall into place and became a success in your eyes.
Yeah, that's such a great question because when I look at sort of the arc of the last 15 years of doing this work at Princeton, it's pretty remarkable. And so I'll say a couple of things, right? One of my core principles in doing this work is to foster distributed sort of leadership. So it's not all coming from me. It's not all coming from my office. It's how do we foster relationships with people all over the community who have expertise in their areas, right? How can they become an advocate for all of this and partner with us? So what I've seen, one of the things I'm really delighted by is how that network, how that community has grown over the past 15 years. So now we really do have advocates all over the community who are bringing their expertise and their care to this issue and working as partners on all of this because I can't do it alone. My office can't do it by itself. So that's one thing I'm really inspired by is the generosity of others and the care that people bring to this topic. And so that's one thing. And that bears fruit constantly, right? Something else that I'm super excited about, which is totally sort of different, that's much more like a real, like tangible thing, right, on the campus, is this we have a food scraps, like food waste digester on the campus. All right. Now this doesn't seem it's like a glorified composting system, right?
Okay.
It's a big drum that rotates slowly. You stick food waste in one end and it comes out as compost on the other. It's a great system. It's like a glorified worm stomach. If you think about how
does it have worms in it, or is it just using chemicals?
No, it doesn't.
Like digest, like enzymes.
Yeah, I mean, basically everything, food scraps have all the bacteria and everything good bacteria that you need. They have bad stuff too, but if you put it in a composting system and the temperature gets up to, a certain amount, all the bad pathogens are killed and the good bacteria are still working to, break everything down. But if you think about what a worm does out in the forest floor, it's a detrivore, which means it's eating all the small stuff and helping breaking it down. And so the nutrients are then available for the trees. So if you think about what goes in one end and what comes out the other, it's a tube, right? And it kind of comes out as this awesome stuff like fertilizer for the forest floor. And that's essentially what we have.
And that's used throughout the campus. So in other words, all the scraps from dining halls when we were back in session, of course, we know that Princeton's doing a year remote, but that's what would happen. And you take all of that compost and put it back into the soil in and around Princeton campus.
Yes, exactly. And the reason that I'm excited about that, and ours is a demonstration scale, so it's not taking care of all the scraps, but all of them are being composted somewhere, just not necessarily through this unit. But what I love about it is how it brings the community together. So here you
They
have
get
this.
to turn the thing, or how does it work?
Well, that's all automated, right? But it takes an enormous number of partners to actually make this work. So if you think about what has to happen, and so there's a couple of global issues that are driving this, right? One is there's a global problem with food waste. Okay, so there's one thing, and that's something the students are learning about in the classroom. So here we have something on campus where they can take a concept they're learning about in the classroom and actually see a solution to it, one of many potential solutions to a global problem right there. So food waste is a problem all over the world. Soil degradation is a problem all over the world. So if you can capture those nutrients and get them back into the soil, you're doing a huge service. And if you can do that, if you imagine farmland, it requires a huge amount of fossil fuel inputs to get fertilizers onto that land. Most of that's fossil fuel derived stuff. So if you can capture the nutrients from all the food waste, well, reduce food waste in the first place, but whatever's left, get it back into the soil, it requires less fossil fuel inputs to then have to grow food.
So that's interesting. So, I've heard things like, oh, we only have 60 more years until soil is so depleted of nutrient value and carbon and all of these things that are so critical to the whole ecosystem of air quality and plant growth and farming.
Yeah.
Would you argue, since obviously you're in touch with all of the climate change research going on also at Princeton, which is a leader in climate change research. So it's really interesting how you're showing the next generation of students and inhabitants of this planet how critical this is. So is that an issue of soil? Soil is a big topic, I would imagine, in Princeton.
It's a huge topic. And of course, if you put food waste and any organics in a landfill, you're creating a methane situation, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So there's many dimensions to this. It's this machine, but like I said, it brings together all these disciplines. It brings together all these operational folks. So you got to have the dining folks partnered. You have to have the grounds department involved because they come and they take the compost away and they use it, right? It takes collaboration with faculty who are using it either as part of research or part of classroom teaching. And then there's students who are doing senior thesis projects and graduate students who are starting to study it. So it's this like living laboratory. But I'm really excited about it because it's not the type of thing that Princeton's used to doing in terms of having like that kind of demonstration scale, really hands-on, applied, get your hands dirty kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we aspire as a campus to do more of that, but it was one of the first. And so, students actually love working there. It's not a super pleasant job. It's hard work. It's aromatic work.
Yeah. Putting it lightly. Yes.
It's not growth, but it's not like, it's not a sanitized sort of experience. And actually the students love it because it's real.
Yeah.
And they can track what's on their plate. They can follow it,
Oh,
from
that's
the composter to the grounds department, to the flower beds where they bring it back to on campus. It's really very cool.
It's remarkable. And then also you and I had talked in the past about how other campuses look to other campuses. They're all watching each other, and there's sort of this educational competition on a very positive level to see what other people are doing, what other campuses, how they're doing this in their communities, community outreach. So I find that really healthy when you have all these major institutions that have so many fingers into the communities, but also globally, one-upping each other in a positive way to be more innovative and more sustainable. And
I love that too, because every campus tries it a little bit differently, right? And that's what you need. You need locally appropriate solutions, right? You need at least solutions that work for your setting. So whatever we do here at Princeton might not work for another campus, but there's probably elements of it that are worth learning about, and then tweaking it for whatever your local situation is. So I find that really energizing to talk to peers, to talk to colleagues at other institutions, because they're all tinkering with the same stuff, and we learn from each other, and we can move faster because of that.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and you know, the eyes are all on some of these major institutions. I mean, all colleges have their contributions all over the world, but you know, some have reputations that sort of ripple effect into other areas. And so I think it's all wonderful, and to lead as an example, to be the leaders in areas like climate change, or to be um, you know, promoting these kind of, we're all looking for leadership now on so many levels. So it's kind of nice, you know, since we have climate change. So tell me a little bit about if there are any projects that you're involved with right now, or what are your thoughts on the climate change research that's going on, especially locally, and then also globally?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm really excited about right now is concrete. So
That's
concrete
cool.
as a building material, right? So it's one of the most common building materials around the world. Concrete has an enormous carbon footprint associated with its production.
So what does it mean by carbon footprint?
So it takes an enormous amount of fossil fuel based energy, not only to um, create the concrete, but the mining of the elements that go into concrete is also very fossil fuel intensive. There's high heat processes involved in producing those materials. So it's like, all told, every step of the way in producing concrete requires an enormous amount of fossil fuel input. So that's what embodied carbon means. It's like, you know, if I build a kitchen cabinet, you know, what's the carbon footprint associated with that?
Which means using up the you know, we don't want to, or I should say, it means really watching how much we use of something that's so vital to our
Right,
environment. In other words, footprint is not necessarily a good thing. It's just meaning how much is
right.
used.
Well,
Yeah.
and I'm
Okay.
glad you brought that up, because there's these ways of thinking about this. So footprint is tends to be the sort of negative part, like, oh, I have a bad footprint, right? I want to shrink my footprint. But what there's a subtlety to that flips it to the positive. And this is where I get excited about behavioral psychology and behavior change. We don't always want to be talking about sustainability in terms of you got to do less, you got to sacrifice. I mean, there are sacrifices we do need to make, but a sacrifice is perception, right? What we want to think about is, how can I have a really positive handprint on the world? I want to reduce my footprint, but I want to increase my handprint.
I like that.
So it's how we think about ourselves in this. So we don't want to just constantly think of like, oh, I just need to be less bad. That makes us feel bad, like we're just bad, right? Instead, how can I think of myself as, ooh, I'm part of this sort of restorative, regenerative, healthy process of repairing what's become disconnected or damaged. That's a different way of approaching it. That's much more inspiring, right? So take concrete, right? You can think of like, oh, how do I just make it less bad? um, and that's an important step. You know, first step is good, less bad. That's fine, right? We often have to do that, but then don't stop there. Like, think about, ooh, how can this actually become like a regenerative process for communities around the world, rather than an extractive, damaging process for communities around the world. So we have faculty who are doing research on this, on sustainable concrete technologies, but we have an industry that is not yet applying those kinds of technologies. So one of the things that any organization that's doing construction, so on campus we're building buildings. Lots of campuses are doing that. They're growing. Many are not, but some are growing. And if we can use the fact that we're building stuff to encourage the industry to start looking at more sustainable ways of doing their business, and it makes them more competitive because we're more likely to work with them if they do that, that helps everyone. That helps them develop a product that's then accessible to everybody in the region who's using concrete.
That's walking the walk. Basically, you're creating, you're researching, funding, creating, and utilizing the materials, and then saying, "Look at us." And if you want to partner with us, by the way, this is sort of a positive, movement. So I think that's really interesting. And so there are buildings now currently with this new concrete, or they're still in the process of researching and rolling it out?
Yeah, we're very early in this. So the technology that our faculty are developing has only been applied in a few places in the world and nowhere in the U.S. So what we're trying to do is build again, it goes back to like building relationships, right? We're trying to build positive relationships with the concrete manufacturing sector, and start to talk to them, build relationships with them, do joint testing with them, so that they start getting more comfortable with these alternatives, right? So we're at the very beginning, and so I'm hoping over the next, few years we start to see we will start to actually use some of these preliminary products, but then keep pushing it.
And keeping costs down. I mean, look, so many businesses are all about the dollar bill. So, the question's really going to be, is this going to be something that can be plugged in such a seamless way financially that their board of trustees and their managing partners and all the people that are involved in this, because humans don't like change. I mean, as you know, humans general do not like change. So,
and that's an excellent point. And that's also part of sort of guiding principles that we follow, is that we should be demonstrating what is like immediately useful for others, and also things that are innovative and help to push us along, so that eventually these things do become totally cost effective replacements for the current practices. So if we can help with that early innovation, that's really exciting. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit. Well, I'm sure you have a list a mile long of projects that you're involved with, or you have input on, or you're teaching, or are going on at Princeton. But we sat down not too long ago, and you were telling me some really interesting stuff about something that's near and dear to my heart, since I grew up in Princeton and was a high school student in Princeton, and often wanted to sneak into Princeton Reunions, which is a very festive time for all of us. I'm sure I have my friends listening that can recall those days. Those were hot tickets. And so tell us a little bit about Princeton Reunions, what they are in terms of their fun and excitement and history, but also their utilization of beer and alcohol, and and then what your place was when you had this task to think about, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah. So Princeton Reunions is one of the most remarkable spectacles of sort of pride and fun associated with the institution. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. Right? It really is this outpouring of love for the institution and for everyone's experience, having been an undergrad or a graduate student there. Sort of the outpouring of gratitude to the institution is really remarkable, and it's such a great party. right? It's a
And
celebration.
it's a week long, right? Isn't it? It goes
It's
for an
like
entire,
it's
or,
essentially like 4 days long, right?
maybe that's when I was, back then, can't remember much. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a big event. I mean,
It's a
people
big
gear
event.
up, they dress up, they come back, and they're wearing crazy Princeton University,
Yeah.
clothing, and their jackets that they graduated with. It's just,
Yeah.
it's unique.
Yeah. And there's a parade and there's, fireworks, and I mean it's a big old party. And along with that kind of scale, and we're talking 20, 25, 30,000 people. So excuse me. It's a huge event, and with a huge event like that comes an enormous amount of waste. So it's something that we've acknowledged. It's something we want to shift, and it's enormously complex. So on one hand, it's this puzzle, right, that intrigues me. It's like, how do you change something like this that is so steeped in tradition, and sort of habitual tradition? And how do you keep the best traditions and move forward with and create an event that everyone can be even more proud of, that can be even more celebratory? So, and we hear from alumni who want to see that change, and certainly current students want to see that change. So we have student crews that work on it, and so we've been tinkering with this for the past decade, and are really trying to transform it. So I'll just give one example of something that happened, not this past year because we didn't have an in-person reunion, but the year before. So the last in-person reunion. We acknowledged, we did kind of an audit of waste at reunions. And what we discovered was that even though we were putting out recycling containers everywhere, very little of it could be recycled because it was so contaminated. And I'm not like putting blame on anyone. This is a situation that happens everywhere. And this is where the complexity comes in. So here you have this huge event. You have each class kind of doing its own purchasing. So there might be 10 different types of cups, for example,
Really?
at the event.
I didn't know they all did their own purchasing.
They do.
Wow. And that's
So
a lot of
they all do their own
classes. How many
planning and-
classes? My goodness.
Yeah. So it's kind of it's nuts, right? So you have all these different products coming in, some of which might be recyclable, some of which might not. How do you separate? How do you make it easy for people to put the right stuff in the right bin? It's almost impossible when you have that kind of event where people are partying pretty hard, and there's different situations at each class area, different materials. Like you'd have to have a custom sort of collection system at each location. You'd have to have staff at the bins telling people what to do. Like it becomes this logistically incredibly challenging problem. So,
And then steps in Shana, and you have to fix it.
well,
Or at
right.
least
And like, how do we do this without spending an enormous amount of money? Like, how do we do this as a community? How do we rally and actually fix this so that we're all happy with it? And it's easy. But the reality was we were putting out these bins, and so it's going to take us several years to work through all this. In the meantime, though, we don't want to be giving the impression that we're recycling when in fact that's not what's happening for a variety of complex reasons. There's global market reasons. It's the purchasing habit reasons. There's logistics reasons, all kinds of reasons. So last year, the last time there was an in-person reunion, we put out trash bins only with a big sign on each one that said, if you're looking for a recycling container, here's why you're not seeing one. And we were expecting a very negative backlash about this. But in fact, what we got was an incredibly positive reaction of appreciation for the transparency, that we don't want to appear to be doing something that's not actually working. So in other words, everyone sort of feels good about it, but it's not actually doing anything. So there's this appreciation for that transparency and a desire to help. Because we were asking, we need help, like figuring this out. So tapping the expertise of this incredible alumni network. And we had this incredible behavioral outcome that we did not expect. The usage of cups at that reunion went down dramatically because we think, because alumni were reusing their cups because they didn't feel right. Like it just didn't feel right to just put all this stuff in the trash. So we think there was this behavioral reaction of, oh, I'm just going to use this a few more times rather than just getting a new one, because I don't have the sort of moral.
You don't have the support network that it's going to go off somewhere and do something good with itself.
Right. So it was dramatic reduction. And we got the numbers from the beer vendor, the beer vendors, because they know how many cups are used. And so that was really encouraging. So
what about, I think I asked you this when we were sitting talking about it. What about, on cruises? I mean, I went to a couple cruises in my time, and nowadays they give you an unlimited supply of drinks depending what package you choose, but they give you a cup, and people just kind of almost are proud of their cup. They walk around, refilling. And is that something that would be encouraged or thought of for the future?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the options that we're exploring. The trick now, so because we were tinkering, sort of partnering with individual classes over the years, kind of tinkering around the edges, what we want to do now is move out of pilot mode into full event mode. That's where the real challenge comes, because we can do lots of little innovative things with an individual class in any given year. But when you scale that up to the whole event, it is a whole different logistical world. But that's what we need now. We want to move away from constant pilot mode to, okay, we know enough now. We've learned enough now. We've tried enough small scale strategies. Now let's figure out how to do it across the entire event. And that's what we're working on right now.
That's amazing to coordinate just within one school. It shows you sort of how difficult this can be on such a township, community, state, region, national level. I mean, it's just all the moving parts. It's pretty remarkable.
And then others have done it. I'm really impressed by University of Colorado at Boulder. They have an athletics program there that is pretty near zero waste in terms of athletic events. And it's this whole thing. It's like, it's a team pride thing. The fans have totally embraced it. They have this whole like cup and recycling and program that is really remarkable. And so there's inspiring examples. And then of course there's been things like green fests, huge events that have happened around the country for many years. So there are a number of people who have experience running huge events, and figuring this out.
And this is becoming such a big deal. I mean, there's consulting groups around the world, and this whole idea of not just green chemistry, which is where you design the molecules so that they break down in the environment over time, wherever it ends up, if it ends up in a landfill, if it ends up on the side of the road, God forbid, or whatever. But there is green chemists, then there's this whole kind of continuum of different places of intervention so that these products and chemicals and waste don't get out into our environment eventually and
Right.
don't break down over time and kind of get in
Right.
our waterways, which ends up in human bodies
Yes.
and human health issues. So
Yeah.
that being said, kind of, what are your thoughts about this connection between environment and human health and wildlife in terms of
Yeah.
what your perspective is, given that you're from the sustainability world and I'm from the medical world? I'd love
Yeah.
to, get your thoughts on that.
Oh, it's such a profound connection. So one of the other things I'm really excited about right now in thinking about materials, like the materials that you and I are come into contact with every day. And right now, I'm really involved in a lot of building projects on campus. And it's weird because, I'm an ecologist, climate scientist, working with engineers and architects. And I mean, it's really fun. And I've sort of learned enough about how to navigate in that world to, I think, be somewhat helpful. But one of the things that we're really focused on right now that we haven't been in the past as much as I would have liked is healthier materials in buildings. So we're talking about like finishes. I mean, I'm sitting in a room here. There's paint on the wall. There's carpet on the floor. There's sealant on the wood floor underneath. There's adhesives. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into building any building or in your own home. And all of those materials may be exposing you to toxic materials. And thankfully, there are systems in place now, information that's available where you can make different material choices, and they are available in the market. So, um, so I'm very, very keenly. I have a dear friend who works in this field who's very, very sensitive to these kinds of chemicals, and I think probably we all know someone who's chemically sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and if you think about a lifetime of cumulative exposure to some of these things, it's really significant. And we don't even know what all the impacts are. So if there's anything we can do to make so there's a school here in New Jersey called the Willow School. And it's a nature-based curriculum school. And everything they do, they had the first constructed wetland in the state that processes the stuff that comes out of the bathrooms at the school.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
the first permitted one in the state. This was
So
years ago.
wait, so explain this more in detail because even I'm like, really? Like, so how does this work? So the toilet waste gets converted into a safe space outside that is not like a cesspool as we would normally
Correct.
think of it. It's an
Correct.
ecosystem that breaks down human waste
Yes.
in a way
Safety.
that
Yes.
promotes growth and life
Yes.
within in smaller environments or outdoor environments.
That's
Okay.
exactly right.
Okay.
So there's usually a couple of underground tanks involved to kind of separate
Mhm.
out the solids and things, but then the wetland plants themselves
Hmm.
process all the nutrients, and the water coming out of that system is usually cleaner than the water that went in to flush the toilets in the first place. Um, it's like wetlands are like the kidneys of the water system of the planet, right? They're these filters, and they're remarkably good at it. So they use it as a classroom also. So
Wow.
they teach their students about there's these systems. But the reason I brought it up is because they think about their buildings in the same way. When you walk into their like mixed use building, it's their cafeteria, it's their theater, it's their gathering space. You walk in and you feel good. You're like, why do I feel good in this building? There's natural light, there's natural ventilation, all the materials are non-toxic. Um, your body is not detecting anything bad when you walk in there. And it's a remarkable physical sensation. It's like you can't really put your finger on it. But that's what you want, right? That's what we aspire to. Is like, how do you make spaces that are healthy and are not constantly taxing your body?
Yeah, I agree. When I moved into this practice space, it was a blank slate, and it was a real challenge and a real opportunity for me to walk the walk and say, listen, if I'm going to put or not put chemicals into my body, I should be thinking about exposures from a place I spend enormous amount of time.
Yeah,
And putting in non-toxic paints that have zero VOCs that are available now, or putting
yeah,
in tile instead of carpeting,
yeah,
or ceramic tile, bringing in a couch and researching the couch, which is easily done now.
yes,
That you can actually suss out which couches that are on the market and available to everyone at reasonable cost don't have flame retardants. And the
exactly.
list just goes on in terms of cleaning products or cleaning services that you use, and whether you allow those chemicals to be on your surfaces to aerate off. And I think that's an ecosystem in and of itself that I think you're describing at this Willow School, where they're looking at every aspect and every touch point in human bodies and
Yeah,
thinking about it, as well as the environment that they hand off as well to the next
yeah,
generation. So that's pretty remarkable.
yeah, yeah. And it all goes back to what I said earlier about having a connection, being connected with everything that's influencing your life. So if I have no idea about the chemical exposures associated with certain products, I'm not going to know to care about it. I'm not going to know that I might want to talk to my favorite brand and say, "Hey, can you are you developing any products that don't have this stuff in it?" Like they listen. Um, so all of that matters, right? I mean, we're sort of painting a picture of like a tapestry, right? And then all the threads running through the tapestry, and how they're all connected.
I call it the storyline. I mean, we've talked
Yeah,
about this before. The
yeah,
storyline is not just one piece. It's not just human health, medicine, or prevention, or endocrine disruption and those chemical effects.
yeah,
It's also this piece of, what is our behavioral choice in purchasing? What is our concept of downstream effects and
mhm,
delayed gratification, not only for human health, but our products that we buy and where they go.
yeah,
And the storyline is the environment affects humans and
yeah,
wildlife, just like humans and wildlife have an effect on the environment that they live in. And that's a complete circle to me.
yeah. And then there's also the environmental justice dimension.
Yep.
So we have overburdened communities all over the world who take the brunt of a lot of pollutants. And that ranges from air pollutants, water pollutants, chemical overloading from products, because the cheaper products tend to be less healthy. Not always, but um, so the exposure is disproportionate in poor communities around the world. So that's a justice issue that intersects deeply with the sustainability field. And I don't think it hasn't been talked about in that way um, for a long time. And I'm encouraged that now the door is open to really start exploring how to be a positive influence in communities, not a negative influence in communities. And I think right now a lot of the story is out of sight, out of mind related to environmental justice issues. And it's something we have to tackle.
Yeah, I think the pandemic really lifted, you know, the lid on a whole host of topics that I don't think people, not necessarily maliciously
Right.
intentionally disregarded, but I think it really made a lot of communities aware of other communities and what they're living through, and not just from an exposure of, say, Flint, Michigan, which is of course lead
Right.
exposure. Now we have it in Newark, many communities are affected by lead in their drinking water, amongst many other chemicals. But downstream winds from manufacturing plants in Louisiana and along the Ohio River. And, it's remarkable. How do you fix the air when you're downstream from something as bad as a manufacturing plant that's, allowed to have that kind of, allowed to put those chemicals in the air as from our government in terms of oversight. So, and there's health injustice, health injustice that relates to sustainability, environmental justice. They're all interconnected because you don't have access to clean food. You don't have access to clean air. You have more asthma. You have worse COPD and emphysema. You get higher rates of lymphoma and leukemias and cancers. Your drinking water, you have to go, 20 miles away to fill up a bottle for clean drinking water. And so I think, it's a big picture issue and environmental justice. Please tell me some of the work that Princeton's doing, you're doing in this area.
Well, I think as you can imagine, this is an evolving topic, and the institution is approaching it with not just environmental justice, but racial justice, social justice more broadly. And this is one dimension of it. And I think that it's an important, given Princeton's history and privilege. I'm glad to see we're approaching it humbly, and in learning mode, and in meaningful action mode. There's no quick fix to this. It's got to be a long-term commitment. And I'm definitely seeing that, which is really encouraging. In terms of environmental justice, I think, we have our sustainability action plan, which is our framework on the campus. And I think what it means for us as an office, as a program, is connecting the dots through that framework, and really using that framework as a tool to do more complete accounting, so that then we can make better decisions, and so we can use what we're doing as a educational enhancement. The other piece of it really goes back to relationships and community building. So where are the authentic relationships that we can develop with environmental justice organizations, where it's authentic and beneficial, and not yet another extractive relationship, right? So these things take time to build. And we certainly have existing relationships through many programs on campus. Our Diversity and Inclusion, Equity and Inclusion Office, our PACE Center for Civic Engagement, have many relationships in the community. So we're looking forward to getting on that path in a serious way. The institutions also, there was an announcement that came out this week about the Schmidt family funded an endowed faculty position in Indigenous studies, which I was really happy to see.
Wow, that's unique. Is that the first in the country you know of, or is that?
No, it's not the first in the country. I don't think we're not necessarily ahead on this one.
Okay,
but it's a signal that we're starting to really build these conversations into the academic experience of the campus by having a faculty position dedicated to this. That's a huge signal of commitment, because that means teaching, research, in an area where we haven't had that kind of attention. So that's really encouraging, and there's
and visible to all the students who are coming through the university and understanding the weight of that position and that appointment and that topic that's being brought to the community. I think that's really interesting. So that's interesting. So there's all sorts of change going on, essentially, and and hopefully for the future, these, once we get through this pandemic, which, of course, we're in the midst of right now, um, there's a lot of hopeful projects that are moving forward to make the world, a better place, a cleaner place, a safer
Mhm.
place. Are you hopeful? I mean, tell me about your thoughts on the future. It's hard to say right now. We're all
I
pretty
know.
depressed with the COVID. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
really a hard time
No,
right now.
I think that to be in this field, I observe this among my colleagues too. You kind of have to have I would say I'm a practical optimist. I can see the possibility. There is no question in my mind that we can do all of this. No question. None of this is actually impossible or that we have all the tools. It's the societal will to do it that I worry about.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, we witnessed that with things like mask wearing. I mean, you look at
right,
some of the very basic
right,
behaviors of
right.
just change, positive change as a community. I mean, altruistically as well as personally, and it's hard to watch. I think I have a hard time as a physician watching this when we know so many people are dying every day. I just
Yeah.
it's a hard thing to watch and understand.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking about this morning. Um, People who do sustainability work tend to be really good bridge builders because we have to be. So one thing I tell my staff and anyone new who works for me, I say one of the first things I say is, look, if you run into someone on campus, and you will, who maybe doesn't seem to be on board or maybe is even not supportive of the work, think of them as someone who may be at some point one of your strongest advocates.
Hmm.
Because I've seen it happen over and over again, where 2, 3, 5 years down the road, all of a sudden, something has shifted and they are now an incredible advocate. So you have to see that potential in people and be patient
Hmm.
with and the reason I bring this up is because you brought up the mask thing. There's this perception of incredible divide in the country right now, and the mask issue is a kind of an illustration of that. But I don't think the disconnect between people is as deep as is being portrayed. And this is just my opinion, but I often find that as human beings, we care about the same things. And so, how can we be those bridge builders? And how can we um, find that common ground and respectfully disagree when we do, and and start to rebuild um, the divides that seem to be so prevalent right now? I just don't think they're as deep as we think they are.
Yeah,
It's in the rhetoric.
and I think I need to believe that as well, because otherwise it doesn't help me move forward with positive work. I mean, I think you
Yeah,
need to have some degree of hope. And that's why I like working with young people too, just like you like working with
yeah,
young people, is there's the hope amongst young people who get it. Not that older people don't, of course, but just, there's an energy, there's a hopefulness, there's
mhm,
a proactive desire amongst young people to sort of get it
mhm,
right or to right our wrongs. And I think there's something about that is
yeah,
inspiring that I don't often see even amongst my own age colleagues sometimes,
yeah.
that I
Oh,
pull from that environment. So
I
I think,
absolutely draw from that.
yeah,
They're,
yeah.
they're worried. They're worried, and they're passionate and creative, and
And
they want to.
fearless. I see a
And
lot of
they're like,
fearless. I
yeah,
think that's something as we get older, we get more fearful, I think.
I think
of,
so
of,
too.
of who
I
we
know.
impact and who's going to come at us and who's going to,
Yep.
text us or come after us and
Yep.
troll us. But I think there's something about young people that has
I
this sort
agree.
of purity that's good stuff. At least that's what I'm trying to draw off of. So tell me something, Dr. Weber. How can members who are, people listening to this podcast, really give me top 3 things that you think someone listening could do right now to, make an impact, a positive impact on the earth or their environment, their community?
I love that question. And the challenge of that question is that the answer might be different for each person. So one thing that I really like to encourage people to do is just look at your life as you live it and find the 1, 2, or 3 things that you think you can chew on, like, right, that you're willing, that you'd be excited to make a shift in. And that's going to be different for every person. Now, I mean, I could talk about like what are the most important things in the world, like, um, but some of those things are not actually things that individuals can impact every day. So one example is like energy infrastructure, right? Like most of us are not making decisions about energy infrastructure across like whole campuses or grids or all of that, right? That's happening at a different scale in a different arena than most of us have an influence in, right? Other than by voting. Um, so so there's that. So personally, right? There's if you're passionate about fashion, there are some really awesome options out there now where you can become a champion for sustainable textiles. And we don't have time to go into the whole like footprint versus handprint of textiles around the world. But there's really there's top-notch designers who are getting into it. There's lots of fabric options now. You can become a champion if that's your passion, right? If you care a lot about personal beauty products, lots of options. So again, and you can talk to your friends about it. You're like, oh, I found this, this lipstick or this mascara or this face, cleanser that has that doesn't have any of these, concerning chemicals in them, and I really like it, and it works well, and that kind of thing really makes a difference because of the ripple effects it has through your friendship networks. And, if you're passionate about it, that's contagious. If you're not passionate about it, you're probably not going to have a huge impact, right? So choose like what matters to you and just pick 1 or 2 things that you'd feel encouraged about. That's my recommendation.
I think that's
Yeah.
great advice because people feel passion. They feel it and they absorb it and they want a part of it and they want to feel part of this movement. So I think that's absolutely correct. Go with what fills you up and just try to do it a little bit better, cleaner, smarter. You don't
Yeah.
have to necessarily get rid of your car and go buy a Prius or, but turning off lights that, people are kind of fixated in some of the things you hear, like, turn off all the lights at night and,
Mhm.
get
Yeah.
an energy safe, look into energy safe cars and,
Yep.
look at eating, meatless Tuesdays or, there's
Right.
all different ways people can get involved in things that matter most. If you're an animal lover, if you want to,
Mhm.
go vegan or what have you,
That's right.
it's one of those things where it's so operator dependent.
Yep. Yep.
But I think your background in looking at behavioral, science is really unique in how people make these decisions. It has to hit you in your heart, or kishkas, as we say in Yiddish. It has to hit you
Yeah,
right here,
it does.
to
And if
stick.
you do have like a big purchase coming up, like a car or those are worth looking at because those are not daily decisions. Those are like, those are infrequent. So those are also opportunities, those big purchases.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, I'll tell you, I think what you shared today was really quite enlightening. And it's just one piece of this big communal puzzle. What you're doing is part of such a global, all the ramifications can be so positive. And so I appreciate your work at Princeton University and all of your training and work you do with behavioral science. So thank you for being on this show and for sharing with this audience all that you do. And I look forward to working with you, seeing with you, or having a beer with you in the future. So,
I look forward to
since
that
you're my
as well.
local friend, I love it. So,
Thank you, Haley.
and also I did want to make mention there was an animal roaming around behind you.
Yes.
Could you explain to the audience who may not be visually seeing this on the YouTube version, who's living in your house? I know you have a child, but could you tell us about that?
So here's the nature lover coming out in me. So in the beginning of the summer, I had an opportunity to foster a wild turkey chick who was abandoned, and so she has become like a member of our family.
Oh my God.
So she's outside most of the time with our chickens, but occasionally I'll open the window and she'll jump in the house and hang out with me. So she's been sitting here on the floor.
That is the funniest thing I've
Yeah.
ever heard. And you didn't even tell her anything. You held her ears about Thanksgiving, right? You just didn't want her to know anything about it. Okay, good.
We did not eat turkey this year.
That is good parenting, Shana. That is very good parenting. I'm impressed. So that is really funny to see that behind you, to see that beautiful. What's her name, by the way?
Depending on what she's doing, I will call her Squeaky.
Oh,
She's very talkative and she has lots of different squeaks. So I'm trying to learn turkey language. And sometimes I also call her Lurky the turkey, because she will sit at the windows and look inside, wondering what everybody's doing in here.
I have to tell you, that is the best way to end a show, is to learn about your wild turkey that comes in and out of your house. I love it. So thank you again, Shana, for being here and being part of the show. And good luck with all your work moving forward. And be safe and well, you and your family.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Bye.